We see a lot in environmental justice that our communities are sacrifice zones. And again, this is a pattern. You're adding risk to communities that are already at most risk. This is going to happen whether the EJ communities like it or not.
I'm Dr. Lamont Repollet, the president of Kean, New Jersey's urban research university. This is Urban Impact, a podcast where we examine the complex issues facing urban communities through meaningful conversations with scholars, community leaders, and others who are driving change. Recorded and produced on our campus in Union, New Jersey, this is Urban Impact. Here are your hosts, Michael Salvatore and Barbara George Johnson.
So, Mike, the conversation that we have with Dr. Sheats, it was so exciting to hear and learn how we are defining environmental justice, but all of the various scientific aspects.
There's so much to uncover. So I'm really interested to hear part 2 of environmental justice with Nicky Sheats. Right now, a hot topic is the Inflation Reduction Act going on because there's an infrastructure component built in there. And when we use infrastructure, I'm going to talk specifically about clean energy. Right?
Yes.
So there's an infrastructure component, and they're starting to reveal kind of behind the curtain the things that you're talking about. They're talking about in burgeoning metropolitan areas, largely of families of color, of low income. We have what you're calling dirty, or I'm saying dirty power plants, just not clean energy, high pollutants. And this concept to combat that, because it's not easy. You take like a city like Manhattan, right, which has some of the dirtiest power plants in the U.S. and really densely populated. How do you shut that down? But also how the topic of transmission. How do we get clean energy into these cities that really need it?
You might be sorry you asked me that question, so here we go. So there's a fight going on now. So in the Inflation Reduction Act, there's policy, there's money available for various types of methodologies to produce clean energy. There are tax credits available for energy efficiency and renewable energy. Renewable energy, we're talking about mainly solar and wind, which everybody thinks is good. But then there are also tax incentives for things that have been more controversial, like carbon capture and sequestration, commonly referred to as CCS, and hydrogen co-firing or burning hydrogen. And here's where the controversy comes. Say everybody is in favor of, almost everybody is in favor, I shouldn't overstate that, is in favor of energy efficiency and renewable energy, but not everybody's in favor of the carbon capture and sequestration and hydrogen co-firing. So the CCS, carbon capture and sequestration, so the main idea there is, so go back to the power plants. They emit carbon dioxide, and they emit these other pollutants that we are worried about also, like the particulate matter. And so in the parlance of climate change mitigation policy, right, policy intended to fight climate change, these other air pollutants are called greenhouse gas co-pollutants. So the power plants emit the carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas, and these co-pollutants. So the idea of carbon capture and sequestration is after you burn whatever you're going to burn, whether it's oil or natural gas, but before the carbon dioxide goes in the air, you capture it. You take it out of the emissions pollution, air stream, you capture it, and then you pipe it somewhere and you put it underground. And then the hydrogen, and so you've eliminated the carbon dioxide. You haven't eliminated it. It hasn't gone into the air.
But it's gone somewhere.
But the idea is that it's going to be underground basically forever. What EPA did, Environmental Protection Agency, right, federal agency, when they just issued their climate change rule, how they're going to stop climate change, back in May, and we worked all summer on comments on it that were due in August. They said, well, how we're going to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions is to use this carbon capture and sequestration. We're going to put that on plants. Or we're going to give them an alternative to say, instead of burning the oil or natural gas, you can burn hydrogen, which produces less carbon dioxide than burning the oil and natural gas.
We have to talk more about this. So is hydrogen the answer? Because and I know there's an array, right? There's the pink,
Yeah.
the green, the blue. Is
Yeah.
that right? Is that the answer for a cleaner energy solution for all of us? Because there's some skepticism and a lack of science around some of it too.
Exactly.
Well-
What is the downside to hydrogen?
So now you're talking to an environmental justice person, right? And this is very timely because the administration just announced these hydrogen hubs. And I was listening to a meeting Wednesday night, where they're promoting these hydrogen hubs. The problem from an environmental justice point of view is that the focus is on, and we call this carbon dioxide reductionism, what we would call the overfocus on carbon dioxide emissions and not as much focus on the co-pollutants. Well, there's a potential, at least, with both CCS and burning hydrogen to produce these co-pollutants.
Mm-hmm.
So you may capture the carbon dioxide, but you're not necessarily capturing these co-pollutants. And that's where one of the issues from an environmental justice point of view is we're saying, but wait a minute, you haven't, at least to our satisfaction, told us what you're going to do about these co-pollutants.
And so can I ask about the sequestration? When we talk about redirecting carbon dioxide into the ground, what are the regulations as far as how deep we're going with piping carbon dioxide into the ground? And what does that mean for the stability of the core? When we talk about, again, climate change, shifts in fault lines and all of those kinds of things.
Well, you've hit on the other area of controversy. So one area of controversy are the co-pollutants. So you're going to burn this stuff or the CCS and you're not addressing the co-pollutants. And you may actually produce more co-pollutants, at least certain of them, because of the CCS and the hydrogen. And what are you going to do about that? Then the other problems are the problems with potential problems that you're going to take this stuff and you're going to pipe it somewhere and put it underground. Well, how about pipeline leaks? Those could be dangerous. And how about not so much the fault lines, but how about, at least not with this kind of technology, but you could have leaks from the underground storage areas. Is it really going to stay stored forever? And so then you have fights over how safe that is.
And where does that storage take place? Where are we burying?
Well, that's another issue. They've identified areas that they think are suitable to be buried. But then not only where are you burying them, but how are you going to get it there? Where are these pipelines running through?
And just let me know, because I don't want a vacation at any place where there's going to be some storage of carbon. I mean, this is wild. I don't want to sound like a 12-year-old kid here, but if there's gas under the covers and you lift the covers up, you got a problem there. It's like, hey, you're putting it in the ground. What happens to the soil? What happens to the life in that area? Really interesting.
But to your point, Mike, I think the deliberation and what we're trying to understand is what sort of combination of these things would make sense. Because I imagine that carbon sequestration is not going away. That hydrogen is sort of the new way that we're thinking about this. And then we have the solar and wind pivot to solar and wind as far as our energy source. So what sort of combination of this does the environmental justice community think would make sense? Because all of these things are now present and available to us, and I imagine are not going away.
Well, so that's a great question. So what we've been saying is that, look, what it seems like you're doing to us is you're putting added risk, at least. Because maybe everything will work out fine. Maybe they're right. All this stuff will be fine. But, at least from our side, we see a lot of risks there. Maybe everything won't be fine. And who's bearing the brunt of that risk? Again, it's EJ communities who's bearing the brunt. It looks like they're going to bear the brunt of that risk because the power plants are disproportionately located in environmental justice communities. So we're saying, look, you're putting more risk on communities that already have elevated levels of risk. And that's just, it's not fair. It doesn't make, from an EJ point of view, it doesn't make sense. And to your point, you asked about the regulations, Barbara. We don't see the regulations as solving the problem, because you have environmental justice problems with the current regulations, and now you're adding stuff to it. So we're like, what? Wait a minute. It feels, it feels like our communities are, I don't know. We say a lot in environmental justice that our communities are sacrifice zones. And again, this is a pattern where our communities, you're adding risk to the communities that are already at most risk.
There's an initiative, right, in terms of automobiles and to reduce emissions. And so you see these EVs everywhere and charging stations. But until you fix the dirty power plants, then you cannot expand. And this is where we are kind of in this situation where you can't progress with one area. You can't flood a market with electric vehicles, and we think that to be the answer without having the supplier in terms of being whatever it is, whether it be hydrogen, solar, wind. It's got to be clean. And so I can see why things are starting to stall a little bit, because these questions have yet to be answered about how to do this in an efficient manner.
Well, that's the thing, but they're not being stalled. It's like full speed ahead, and that's the EJ concern. That it looks like it's full speed ahead. The rule promotes both the CCS and hydrogen. And Barbara, to your point, it looks like these are, right now, this is going to happen whether the EJ communities like it or not. And again, it may be for the greater good, but what's happening in these EJ communities?
So how do you get ahead of it and mitigate, to some extent, the impact on EJ communities?
So this is what we're advocating for. We're advocating for a quicker, faster transition to renewable energy and energy efficiency. And this is where, the fights, the models come in. How quickly can you do it? How fast can you make the transition? And what we're saying is, as EJ folks, is, well, look, this money that you gave in incentives in CCS and hydrogen, you need to do more for the renewable energy and energy efficiency, and kind of go for broke for the renewable energy and energy efficiency. We need to have this big effort, more of an effort around that, so that while you're transitioning to cleaner fuels, and look, we want to do that as EJ people too, because climate change is also disproportionately hurting our communities. But we don't want to further hurt our communities while we're making the transition. Right? You don't make these communities worse off while you're making the transition that ultimately will help them. And so that's the big question. And then you get into arguments about how fast can you transition? Is it possible? Can you transition as quickly as you need to do, not to hurt these communities? And that's, Barbara, where we're fighting now. I don't know if we are going to win that battle, because the hubs are coming. The hydrogen hubs are coming. The rule will probably be implemented within the next couple of years. How will this stuff be implemented? And Barbara, you'll be really interested in this. So then, because you say, well, how do you mitigate this? What the EPA is saying, what the government is saying, we'll do community benefit agreements with the communities and protect them. And what we're saying is that, and it puts us in a tight spot, because we're all for communities have to speak for themselves. If communities want these things, but we also say, it's not fair to put communities with this kind of choice, where you say, we will give you benefits, and this is an environmental justice person again, we will give you benefits that everyone else has if you take what we see as risky technology. We're like, well, is that fair? And I give the example, in our country, no matter how poor you are, we won't let you sell a kidney, right? We're like, no, we're not going to do that. Even if a rich person says, we'll give you $20 million for a kidney, we're like, no, we're just not going to put people in that position. And is this an analogy? Is this, some people say, no, Sheats, you're going too far. And I'm trying to make a point. But you see the problem. So one thing we're saying now is that, look, and it looks like they're actually targeting our communities for the CCS has to go where the plants are. So if the plants are in EJ community, that's where it has to go. The hydrogen hubs don't have to, but they're targeting, and the hydrogen hubs will produce hydrogen, but they're targeting our communities for that and saying, well, we'll give you benefits. And so one thing we're saying is that, okay, before you start talking about the benefits, at least give the communities the right of refusal. At least give them the right to say, no, we don't want this in our community. And if they don't want it, then it doesn't go in. Now, if they want it, then we say, then go to the community benefit stage where you're negotiating. But at least, we're very skeptical about even come to communities with these choices. Probably can't stop that, So then we say, at least give the communities the right of first refusal. And along with that, though, comes an interesting dilemma, is who gives the community the information?
Thank you for listening to Urban Impact, a podcast produced by Kean, New Jersey's Urban Research University. Subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get podcasts. For more information, visit kean.edu/urban-impact.